Good afternoon. You're listening to Gambling with an Edge. Now here are your hosts, Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest today is a truly jack of all trades AP named Will. Originally from England, lived in the United States for a while. Now he's in Bali, and he's been at the top of the game of several different gambling games. I think you'll enjoy hearing him. Will, welcome to Gambling with an Edge.
Thanks, guys. Real pleasure to be on. Long-time listener. I'm pretty sure I started listening 10 or so years ago when I first got into AP. So yeah, real honor to be here.
Well, good. And we got too much to talk about, so you may have to come back twice. All right. So briefly, when did you get started gambling successfully, and how did that happen?
I don't know. It took me a couple of years to be successful at it, but I think I first got into it around about 2008, 2009. I was actually taking a road trip around the US with a friend from university just after we finished university, just kind of celebrating graduation. Decided to fly to New York, hire a car, and drive around the US for a few months. And on the flight out, my friend said to me, "Hey, Will, you have to watch this movie, 21. I think you'll really like it. It seems to be just your sort of thing." And obviously he was right. And he did come to regret that recommendation, though, because for the entirety of the 3-month road trip, I became obsessed with the idea of counting cards and made him do the driving while I practiced all my counting drills. And instead of stopping at all the landmarks when we first got to a new city, I insisted that we went to the nearest Barnes & Noble to pick up another counting book that I would flick through for the next few days. But yeah, that was really the start of it. We actually went to Vegas on that 3-month road trip, and I thought I was an absolute wizard at counting cards by the time I got there, and was adamant that I was going to turn my $300 bankroll into many, many thousands that would pay for our trip and help appease Chris's, that's my friend's, aggravation at me becoming so obsessed by counting on this trip. And unfortunately, it didn't quite work out like that. I think I lost the $300 in about an hour, and was convinced that I'd been cheated, and kind of thought that would be the end of it, actually. At that
Really?
point.
You thought they were cheating?
I honestly did, yeah. I remember having this Asian lady dealer at the Mirage who was very unsympathetic towards my losing. You know, I was devastated to lose these $300, and she was just very routine at scooping up my chips and showing no empathy towards me whatsoever. And I thought, I think I know what I'm seeing here. She surely is just one of these coolers or whatever you call these dealers that are brought in to kind of take these innocent tourists' money away from them. And that was the only way I could kind of explain to myself how this enormous 0.5% edge or 1% edge that I had counting cards hadn't manifested into a win in about an hour.
What was your bet spread on your $300 bankroll?
You know, I this is another silly part of the story, but the Mirage, its blackjack table went down to a minimum of $5 at about 4 a.m. in the morning. And a girl had come up to see me, to stay with me in Vegas, who I'd met on a previous trip. She was American. And she just thought, what have I got myself in for? I thought I was coming up here to spend some time with Will and have a good time. And here's this guy getting up at 4 a.m. just so he can, sprint over to the Mirage and play their $5 minimum blackjack table, and come back 2 hours later with his tail between his legs, complaining that some dealer had cheated him. But yeah, I think my bet spread was something like $5 to $25. I mean, just insane, insanely over betting an apparent $300 bankroll. But I thought I had it all figured out, obviously.
But that did not deter you. You decided to stick with it?
I thought it did initially. I thought that was, I was so sort of annoyed about that whole incident that I kind of thought, all right, that's the end. no more of that for me. But actually, when I got back to the UK, it was still in the back of my mind a bit. And then I eventually found myself on some blackjack forums online, just kind of posting there, trying to learn more about it. Blackjack Info was the one that I was on at that time. And yeah, by kind of complete luck, I've never really seen this happen again on forums. I guess so, but not in such an official format. There was someone from the UK on that forum posting that they were starting a team in London, and they had a website. It was quite official, and I kind of at the time thought this was normal. Oh, apparently everyone just sets up teams on forums and invites. I don't think I've ever seen it on a forum again. Not in that way anyway. Since then, and I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need, because I didn't have a bankroll. I didn't know anyone else in the industry, so no one could kind of mentor me in a way or kind of help fill in the gaps of my knowledge. And so I immediately sent off an application. I don't think I slept that night in excitement waiting for the reply. And the guy did actually reply the next morning very quickly and said, can you meet in London? And that was I was living about 3 hours outside of London at the time, and so I made up an excuse to my parents as to why I needed to go to London. And yeah, this is the start of another long story, but I met this guy in a downstairs cafe in Piccadilly, London, and he looked like the blackjack version of Dumbledore, right? He was kind of he was kind of, as I imagined in the stereotypical way the leader of a blackjack team would look. And he had this kind of long goatee, quite long gray hair, spoke very softly, and he basically told me, if you go away and you learn this, this, and this, and you pass a test outside of the casino and then a test inside of the casino, we will start bankrolling you. And I was like, perfect. I kind of knew a lot of what he was asking me to do to go away and learn in the first place, having practiced out in the US. But I went home and just practiced 10 hours a day, something like that, counting cards, learning all the indices. And I think messaged him about a week later saying, I'm ready. And so I went back down to London. I think by this point I told my parents roughly what was going on, but I made it out as if it wasn't a big deal. Like I was just, this was just going to be a 1 or 2 week thing, something like that. And went back down to London. I passed the test outside of the casino. I passed the test inside of the casino. I think I had to retake. Oh no, I made a mistake in the inside the casino one, but it wasn't a big one, so they were okay with it. And all of a sudden I had a bankroll, and I was betting instead of $5 to $25 with a $300 bankroll. I think they started me off at like $5 to 150 or 2 hands of 150. They spread really aggressively in the London casinos, and a bankroll to withstand those swings as well.
Are you still in touch with that guy today, or did?
Yeah, every now and then we exchange emails, but I haven't met him in person for a while. There is one guy on the team, that London team, who I talk to a little bit now, but no, not so much. I mean, we never fell out or anything. We always, when I left the team eventually, about a year or two later, we were on good terms and they understood. But
so did you make good money during that first year and a half?
Yeah, well, it was tough. So they asked me to learn the high-low. I learned that, and I played for over 100 hours, and I was still down. And they were very trusting in the sense that even right at the start, they didn't actually require me to go out with anybody else to kind of have me watched to make sure that I wasn't, skimming or cheating them out of their money, anything, or playing badly even. But after 100 hours, you could see they started, the trust started to waver, their concerns started to increase. And I went away. I had to go away at that point anyway. I think I was going to South America to go and learn Spanish or something. And so it came to like a natural ending point for a couple of months where I went away. And then when I came back, they weren't very keen to have me back, right? I was like, hey, I'm back from South America now. I'm ready to start playing again. But they were like, I don't think they said, we think you're cheating. I don't think they were ever like saying no, never again, but they were wavering. And I pushed them a little bit harder. And they actually said to me, okay, if you go away and you learn Wong halves, a more complicated counting system than high-low, we will start bankrolling you again. And I kind of knew enough about blackjack to know that the fact that I was using high-low instead of Wong halves was not the reason really that I was down after 100
Right.
hours.
And if you were sort of struggling and making errors with the high-low, you're going to do even worse playing with the halves.
Exactly. But in hindsight, it was actually, I don't know if this was the logic behind their decision to ask me to do that, but it was actually quite a good idea, because if I was cheating them, then the amount of time it would take me to go away and learn Wong halves and do another test may not actually that may dissuade a cheater from,
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
that, it's not worth my time anymore. I'll just go and con someone else now instead. But because I was so determined, and by this point I was kind of adamant blackjack was the thing for me, I went away and learned Wong halves. And I think it took me like 3 weeks to get really, to kind of push myself over from high-low to Wong halves and no longer see fives in the same way and start counting the sevens and nines as well. And went back, took the test again with them, passed the test, and kind of the opposite thing happened for the next 100 hours. Like every time I walked into a casino, I just kind of couldn't walk out of there with my pockets full of cash. I mean, like I just got so lucky all of a sudden. And they were like, see, Wong halves is amazing. I'm like, I don't think it's quite I don't think it quite works like that. But it was uncanny how much difference it suddenly seemed to make when I started using Wong halves.
Somewhere around this point, you met Darryl Purpose, who happened to be Richard's playing partner for a couple decades. What did Darryl do for you?
Well, and how did that happen?
Sure, yeah. Maybe I'll go with the second part first. So I played for that UK counting team for about a year and a half, 2 years, and then eventually decided that I'd saved enough from that to now start bankrolling myself. I was splitting everything I earned with them, but there was no real reason for me to continue doing that now that I have my own bankroll. And once I had my own bankroll, I actually joined forces with another UK-based AP who I met on Blackjack the Info, or the Blackjack Info, whatever that site was called. And he had met Darryl at the Blackjack Ball, I think the year before. And I think Darryl had expressed an interest to him to come over to the UK and check out the games here. I think Darryl saw it as a relatively untouched, valuable opportunity, the London casinos for the AP world. And so just by working with that UK-based AP, I got to meet Darryl. And when Darryl came over, I mean, I was just starstruck straight away, because he was a guy that was in the Blackjack Hall of Fame, right? The thing that I thought you would never ever get to meet someone from the Blackjack Hall of Fame, because they're all so secretive, and you need to be intertwined with the US AP world to ever have a chance of meeting anyone like that. And then all of a sudden, like 2 years into my AP career, I'm meeting with Darryl Purpose, and I'm actually about to possibly play with him as well. So that was super exciting, and I think I scared Darryl away to begin with the questions that I had for him, and yeah, the kind of sort of slight starstruck aspect I had whenever I was having conversations with him. But he was great to me. He opened my eyes to what else was possible outside of counting, and just showed me how to get the money off the table as well. Just showed me the mindset of a great AP. And yeah, I learned a lot from him, and he's become a lifelong friend since then.
So after a while, you decided to move to the the United States and Vegas in particular. Uh, so what did you do when you were in Vegas?
So yeah, I left my accountancy job, which I had for 3 years in London, where I was playing part-time blackjack at the same time. Gradually built my bankroll to the point where I was ready to move to Vegas, and I hated my accountancy job as well. I was just so ready to leave. So as soon as I basically qualified from it, finished my 3-year graduate program, I was out and I was on the plane to Vegas the next week. And when I got there, I teamed up with a USAP called David, and he had been a part-time AP as well up until this point, more or less.
Now,
And
how did you meet him?
okay,
Blackjack info again, or
no, it was actually. I mean, all of these stories, I think, are just kind of show the power of networking and having a good name and being a nice person within the AP industry, because it was really just through the kindness of other people that I got to meet other great people. And David I met because I got to go to the blackjack ball through an invitation from Darryl. And I met him there, and he was a friend with Darryl anyway, so kind of got a natural introduction that way. And he was, even though he was going to the blackjack ball, he was really a part-time AP at that point. But I had asked him when I was living in London, hey, I'm thinking about moving out to Vegas. Is there any way I could kind of take some holiday off my accountancy job here, come out and just watch you, go on a trip with you, go on an AP trip with you in the US, just so I can learn something about the US AP world before I move out there full time and I'm completely green and I'm back in the mirage betting, 5 to 25, thinking I've been cheated by the dealer again. So David was extremely accommodating and kind. He said, sure, why don't you fly out for a couple of weeks? I've got a game in mind we can go and play. And so I flew out to his place. We then took another flight to a New Mexico casino, and he knew about this game, and he was happy to let me get in on the action, so to speak. But as soon as we walked into the casino, he was identified instantly. Having been well received on the previous play, they just picked him off. They must have done some review of the surveillance after he left the previous time, decided he was no good, and they picked him off instantly, despite actually having a disguise on this time. So here was my big idea to suddenly learn about the US AP world and get myself fully prepared for moving out to Vegas. And it was kind of over within about an hour. And we kind of traveled all this way. But David was kind enough to try and extend the trip. We ended up going to South Dakota, but we kind of bussed out there as well. And I'd kind of said to him, hey, at the end of my 2 weeks out here, I really just want to go to Vegas, have a look around, see if I can find some accommodation so that when I move there full time, once my job finishes in London, I kind of know where I'm going to be based. And there's not going to be too many kind of unknowns for me when I move out. And I think we eventually got back to David's house. This is before I was going to fly to Vegas, and he was feeling pretty bad by this point, right? I think he felt a little bit worried for me, having flown out all this way, hadn't made any money, hadn't really learned anything about USAPing, and so to try and help me out a bit, he starts flicking through all his mailers from Vegas casinos to get me some free accommodation or some coupons, just to kind of help me get started when I kind of go there the next morning, when I fly there the next morning, and save me a few costs when I do. And actually, by flicking through all those mailers, he got suddenly excited about the idea of going to Vegas. So then he booked on the flight with me to Vegas the next day. We ended up flying there together, and his attitude towards Vegas games at the time was that there really wasn't anything worth playing there. Like, the surveillance was too good. The moves were too well known, and to make any money, you had to kind of go to strange places like New Mexico or South Dakota. But that actually proved to be not true, and we found games instantly in Vegas. And
now you're talking about whole card games, not counting games, right?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were nearly all whole card games, and we found multiple games. But yeah, exactly, I'm talking about higher edge games than card counting, the kind of games that I was hoping to learn more about from David that I hadn't really experienced in the UK yet. And we just wherever we looked, we found games pretty much, and we ran good. And I think inside 2 days we were up like 30 something thousand. And I only had 1 day left before I was supposed to fly back to the UK and go to work. So I was like, all right, David, I would love to carry on playing these games with you, but I've really got to actually look for some accommodation now because I don't want to be living out of a Motel 6 as soon as I move out, as soon as I fly out full time from London. And so we went and checked out this one place that I think I'd heard about, recommended for some poker players on the 2+2 forum. And we're looking around. It's not too bad. It's quite nice. And David says to me, you know what? Like instead of getting a 1 bedroom apartment, why didn't you get a 2 bedroom apartment? And I was like, why would I get a 2 bedroom apartment? And he's like, well, maybe I could use a place in Vegas as well. And yeah, just on that trip, he kind of made the decision that he wanted to go more or less full time APing now with me. And I was extremely lucky to have that situation because it just made having someone with a social security number and a proper US residency that made life a lot easier for me moving out to Vegas as well. And yeah, as a result of that, David and I became full teammates and worked together for the 3 years that I ended up living in Vegas.
And most of that was hole carding.
Yeah, it was, Bob. It was nearly all hole carding, actually. And there was a lot of it around then. It was a good time for it, especially non blackjack hole carding. And we found plenty of games in Vegas initially, and then kind of got thrown out of those casinos, and a lot of the games got burnt out. And then started traveling more throughout the US after that, looking for games elsewhere.
Any bad barrings or backroomings or arrests or any of that?
Um, Not really. Um, I think one of the worst experiences I had was actually, and it wasn't that bad, but it was actually on a date with a girl. I don't know if you guys want me to tell that story.
Sure,
Go
why
ahead
not?
and try not to tell the story now. You have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is about I think a year or two into my time in Vegas, and I'd been seeing this girl, and I think this was about our third date, something like that. And she was a Vegas local, very smart girl, but hadn't really heard, had deliberately avoided any kind of gambling, and hadn't really heard anything about the idea that you could realistically make money gambling. Definitely hadn't heard of the word AP or anything like that. So she kind of expresses an interest in watching me play a little bit. And so on the third day, I thought, okay, I can impress her. I can take her to try and find a game and make some money, and then hopefully she'll date me for longer. What could go wrong, right? And so on the day, I think we had dinner first, and then we parked at Caesar's Palace, and I knew there were some games there at the time, but the problem was I'd been there about 6 months before that and had quite a big score there, and I hadn't been back since. But I thought 6 months, that's enough time for them to kind of not be, not to have my face kind of planted on their surveillance wall, waiting for me to come back. And the play had been well received, right? Like it hadn't ended in heat, anything like that. But my thought process was, I'll go there, see if I can find a game, and if there is a game, I'll call David in, and he'll be the one betting the money, not me. So it won't really matter if I have heat. Anyway, so we start at Caesars. I pretty much straight away see an opportunity that I like. I sit down at the table, and the first strange thing to maybe happen is we get asked for ID twice. Once by the dealer, and then maybe like 4 minutes later, something like that, by the pit boss. And I just thought it was because this girl that I was dating, her name was Erica. Um, she looked quite young, and she was kind of standing behind me because there wasn't a seat at the table yet. And I just thought, oh, maybe the pit boss didn't realize that she'd already been asked for ID and saw us as a couple, so just sort of thought he should ask us both at the same time. So I just kind of threw that one off. But then something else strange happened. Like two security guards walked into the pit, had a chat with the pit boss, but it seemed very casual. I was watching it; it seemed very relaxed. It didn't seem like anyone was particularly tense. I honestly think the pit boss was trying to look super relaxed at this point, and I was still a little bit worried though. And then they actually left the pit together, and they made a turn which was kind of towards the back of me. But I didn't want to follow them at this point. I didn't want them to see me looking at them. So I kind of leaned back to Erica and I said to her, could you just follow that, just watch where that pit boss and those security guards go, please? And about 2 seconds later, she leans back over to me, whispers into my ear. She's like, they're standing right behind you, Will. And I'm like, uh-oh, okay. And I turn around and there's more than two security guards. By this point, there's the pit boss and then about six of them. And the first thing I do is I say to Erica, okay, you go, because they don't want you. You just go and get your car and drive off. And they wait. The pit boss and the security guards wait for me to finish my hand. And then they say, sir, can you stand up from the table, please? And I do. And they say, can we see your ID? And I say, no, I've already shown my ID. And they say, no, we really need to see your ID. Can we see your ID? And I say, no, I'm just going to leave. I'm going to take my chips and leave. And I kind of point in the direction towards the door so it's clear to the camera what I'm kind of motioning to do. And I start walking, and the pit boss whispers to one of the security guards something I don't really hear, but I think that security guard and one other, they start following me to the door, and I think he's trying to read the trespassing act to me, but he doesn't remember it. He has no idea what he's saying, and he's stumbling over his lines. And I get to the door, 10 seconds later, before he's even got like two coherent sentences out. And so he shouts to me when I'm at the door and leaving, and he goes, and if you come back here, we're gonna lock you up, like that. I'm like, okay, I'm done. Thank you very much, guys, and leave. And by this point, I've gone out the main exit of Caesar's Palace, and I'm onto the strip, and I look at my phone, and I have like 7 missed calls from Erica. And I call her back, and she's like, what the hell just happened, right? She's like, this is what you do as a job. And like, just come and pick me up. And so she does, and I explain everything to her, and somehow she continues to date me for like a year after that. But yeah, I think I never got backrooms. I was always, I read enough on the forums to know how to handle situations like that. Now, that's not foolproof. You are still going to run into overzealous security guards who are just going to physically handle you no matter what. But fortunately, I never met one of those guys.
How would you say AP in London or England is different than AP in either Vegas or the States or both?
Yeah, I think obviously the UK AP community is much, much smaller than the US community. And that's really just a consequence through the number and size of casinos in the UK and by comparison, the US. And I think the UK APs, they've had to learn to travel a lot more. They have to go to lots of other countries in order to make a living, whereas US APs tend to just pretty much stay within their own country. Obviously, some do some traveling, especially to nearby countries like Canada or the Bahamas, stuff like that. But UK APs tend to kind of go around the world a lot more. But they are, not another limitation of UK casinos, which you've probably discussed on this podcast before, is just the fact that a lot of them are private membership, and you can't just walk in the door and walk out of the door. You have to show ID. You have to be approved for membership, and And so once your name is no good in the UK, it can be very tricky to continue to play. There's a lower
Well,
CT.
and now the laws have changed there where you have to show that you can afford to play.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it's getting more and more stringent on that front as well. I mean, I haven't played in UK casinos in the last, gosh, 7 years, something like that. So I haven't run into any of those affordability checks that you mentioned much, but I have from a sports betting perspective, and it only seems to be getting worse. The US is pretty relaxed on that front. Like the CTR limit in the UK as well. Like even in the casinos where you don't have to show ID when you walk in, if you buy in for more than I think it's £1,500, you have to show ID anyway. It's not like $10,000 like it is in the US. Yeah, it's there's much less diversity in games as well. Um, you have far more games being offered in the big US casinos than in the UK ones, which typically revolve around blackjack, roulette, bit of baccarat, bit of three-card poker. But when you do find something unusual, probably no one's ever played it before, or it's not like whole carding a particular game in the US where you can just look up the strategy in a book or on a website and off you go. You have to do some of the problem solving yourself, but when you do that, you typically have the game to yourself more than you might in the US.
Currently, some places in London anyway, card counting is against the rules of the club. Is this a new rule or was that in effect when you played there?
I think it was also in effect. So I think that's in the terms and conditions of the private membership clubs, but I'm not 100% on that. And I think it was in the terms and conditions when I played there, but it's not something I ever looked out for because I didn't hear any horror stories of people having their funds confiscated. Only since I stopped playing in UK casinos have I heard some of these horror stories that would probably make me a lot more careful about checking things like that in future. But I counting in London when I played was pretty good. I mean, the rules themselves weren't that great. The blackjack rules, the house edge off the top was more than you might encounter in the US, but they really let you spread, and they didn't bar you until you had made money. They didn't bar you based on your style of play. They barred you based on your profit and loss.
Okay, we're going to take a brief commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk with Will about a change of career away from APing. The South Point has more than 10,000 games returning at least 99%. This is more such game than you can find anywhere else. Throughout July, there's a $650,000 Summer Money Madness promotion, which means there will be two simultaneous casino-wide progressives going, all times, that can be won at any machine where you have a player card inserted and you've played at least $1 in the past minute. The larger progressive starts at 10,000 and must hit by 25,000. All active players not actively hitting the progressive receive $25 in free play. The smaller progressive ranges between $1,000 and $2,500, and it's expected to go off about 3 times a day.
if you're serious about card counting, the Blackjack Apprenticeship membership is a great way to learn, train, network, and get the resources you need to succeed. We've had quite a few guests on Gambling with an Edge who exclusively trained and got their start through Blackjack Apprenticeship. Check out the website at blackjackapprenticeship.com. They have member forums, training software, and guides to help you learn. So that's blackjackapprenticeship.com, and you will find a link in the show notes.
Videopoker.com is the best place to play lots of games. If you sign up for the gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year, this allows you to get correction on most of the games. The game of the week is Split Card Poker. This is 10 coins per hand game where periodically on the deal or the draw, not both, you receive a split card. A split card may be any card. Once the split card is chosen, the additional card may be with equal probability the same card the card higher or the card lower. For example, if the ace of clubs is the split card, it is equally likely to become the ace king of clubs, the ace deuce of clubs, or two aces of clubs. The only pay schedule addition is 5 of a kind on non-wild card games and 5 deuces on deuces wild variations. Okay, Will, starting in about 2015, your gambling career took a different direction. What happened?
Yeah, so by this point, I was into my third year in Vegas, and I kind of felt like it was coming to a natural conclusion, even though I was enjoying it a lot, even though the opportunities to earn still seemed very good. Um, I w- it, my day to day or my month to month in Vegas became quite repetitive. It was just go in, hold card, come out, repeat, repeat, repeat. And it didn't feel like it was very scalable either. Like I was never going to go and double the amount that I earn or triple the amount I earn each year. I felt like I'd pretty much hit a ceiling, at least with hole carding. I was also I was less and less welcome by your border force, your customs officials, every time I flew into the US because I didn't really have a proper visa and I was always showing up with cash. And so, yeah, actually, once you asked me earlier if I had any bad kind of back rooming experiences, not from casinos, but I had a lot of bad back rooming experiences from US customs, where pretty much every time I flew in now, I'd have to go for secondary questioning. They'd always make me feel like I was an imposter or some sort of terrorist. And that starts to wear pretty thin, especially when they make you feel like you're going to be turned around every single time. Thankfully, they always let me in, but I felt like I was at some point that might no longer be true. And yeah, I didn't want to have to kind of face that situation directly. I wanted to preemptively avoid it. So I knew I always wanted to get into sports betting as well. Some of the people in the Blackjack Hall of Fame that I'd always looked up to, like Jelko, Bill Benter, they had transitioned from blackjack into sports betting early in their careers as well. And I thought this seemed like a good path to take. And it was definitely more scalable than APing. So at that time, I had seen that DraftKings and FanDuel were really starting to take off. And I'd also seen that DraftKings had started offering soccer, not just the American sports. And this looked to me like a good stepping stone from APing into sports betting. Like DFS, I didn't want to go straight into trying to figure out who was going to win in the Premier League matches that weekend or other highly competitive markets that would take years and years for me to become profitable at. I wanted to find something that was relatively inefficient, relatively new, that hopefully wasn't going to take too much work to become proficient and profitable at. And DFS seemed like that kind of opportunity for me.
But you were not a programmer, right?
No. So yeah, I wasn't. And I was probably as good at Excel as the average person was as well. And I actually pitched the idea of playing DFS full time to my friend Dan, who I'd met whilst I was an accountant in London. And initially he was quite skeptical, but once we looked at it in more detail, we thought, we can actually do this. And our attitude towards learning to program or code was just, we will figure it out. Right now, that's probably quite naive, and probably, yeah, not a recommended strategy for everybody. But we really did feel like, I think we felt like we could beat it with Excel. We could beat Soccer DFS with Excel to begin with. And if we ever needed to learn to program, we could just learn to program. And it would take time. We wouldn't be very good at it at the start, but we'd gradually get better to the point that, it was a very useful skill.
And
that's
did
kind
that turn out to be true?
Yeah, it did. We did start off with Excel. I don't think we were profitable with Excel and it became very obvious that there were a bunch of repetitive tasks that needed to be done every week that was just poorly performed by Excel. And if we learned to program, we could just automate those and make our lives a lot easier and make our projections a lot better. And, I look back at the code that I wrote in 2015, 2016, and I'm embarrassed, right? Like, it's terrible code, but it got the job done. And um, I've just, and I hope that in 5 years' time, I'll look back at the code that I'm writing today and be embarrassed as well. You just have that attitude that you can keep improving and getting better.
Well, but you also, your degree was not in statistics, right? So you must
Yeah.
have had to do some study there as well.
Yeah, I did economics, which had a statistics component to it, I think, but I hated it at the time. I remember I dropped that part of the economics degree as quickly as I was allowed to, because it just had kind of no meaning when it was just algebra and kind of made up numbers. But all of a sudden, these numbers felt real to me, and there was a real reason to try and convert this raw data into something useful. And my motivation and interest in the subject just took off. But yeah, maybe it was quite naive. I don't know, but it's worked out so far, at least.
And was soccer a weak DFS market? I mean, I would think there would be other ones that would be much weaker.
Well, because DraftKings wasn't operating in Europe at that time, it was very weak, and quite illiquid as well. We were shocked by how, actually, in the early stages, how weak it was. And I don't know how well you know DFS, but you obviously have low stakes and high stakes. And I remember seeing the high stakes players when we first started playing on DraftKings, and just thinking, wow, if we were ever able to beat this guy and this guy, that would be amazing. And we kind of saw those guys as kind of gods of the industry. But it was actually quite surprising how relatively, competitive we could be with those guys early on.
And then did you then start adding additional sports?
Yeah, exactly. We started adding, golf was the next one we went into. We kind of thought that we could convert market information into DFS projections. We kind of thought that we could look at what the odds were for players to win tournaments and convert those into DFS points relatively simply. But that actually turned out not to be true. So we were big losers on DFS golf to begin with. But thankfully, we gradually turned it around, and we turned it around just by actually building our own golf model, not relying on information from the market so much to build our own projections. And then once we built our own golf model, we were like, hey, this is not just applicable to DFS. We can actually use this to bet real sports stuff. And it became like a natural transition into sports betting from there.
So do you still do DFS, or have you fully transitioned over into...
DFS is still a big part of our profit, let's say, at the end of each year. I think it's like 50%. It's about a 50-50 split right now. DFS is definitely not as soft, not as inefficient as when we got into it, and the rate's gone up a lot. And companies like DraftKings and FanDuel are a lot less inclined to kind of put money into marketing, stuff like that. But it's still good, and thankfully, because of the coding experience that we now have, a lot of it is just automated. There's still some manual work we need to do each week to kind of enter the bets and make some subjective adjustments based on stuff that's not incorporated by the model, but it's mostly automated at this stage.
Did you go mainly into big pools of bettors or head-to-head, and why?
It's pretty even. Well, no, it's not even anymore. When we first got into it, there was a lot more head-to-head action, and a much bigger percentage of our profit at the end of the year was just from taking on other players in high stakes. But now the head-to-head action has dried up, and it's more just about the pools.
And in your sports betting, are you using the UK? Are you betting through UK because there are all those restrictions betting there, right? Or are you doing the offshore, or
Mm.
how are you?
No,
Do
we do.
you also? I guess what I'm also getting at is a lot of sports bettors constantly are losing accounts and having to acquire new accounts because they're getting backed off or limited. Uh, do you have those problems as well?
Only occasionally. Thankfully, a lot of the places where we bet the most are companies that don't lose if we win, right? So, like DraftKings, they're just operating like an exchange, they're just
Sure.
operating a pool. So, they're not going to ban us just because we have a good week, because they're still getting their rake and they're not the ones handing over the money to us at the end of the week. And the same goes with exchanges like Betfair, where quite a lot of our turnover is there as well. We do some betting on sports books where if we win, the sports books lose, and unfortunately, yeah, that's just part of doing business. Really, is finding new accounts, but we try to focus on markets where we don't have to worry about getting backed off, because it just makes automating things and scaling things much easier.
How would you compare the mindset of an AP player versus a DFS player?
Um, I think a DFS or a sports bettor has, one of the beauties of blackjack and other whole card game stuff like that is you can quantify your edge quite easily. Like if you're not making any mistakes counting cards, you kind of know what your edge is, and if you can see the dealer's whole cards, you kind of know what your edge is, providing you don't make any mistakes. Sports betting, as a DFS bettor or a sports bettor, you have to be able to tolerate a lot more uncertainty. You have to be able to tolerate the swings better, I would say, because the inclination when you go through a bad run is to assume you don't have an edge. And the worse you are at putting up with those bad runs, the quicker you jump to the conclusion that you don't actually have an edge. Some of this pool betting on DFS, especially the biggest pools, where 25% sometimes goes to the finishing first place, and that's first out of like 30,000 entrants. If you go 2 years without hitting first place, which is quite easily done, even if you have a big edge, you're probably going to be losing on those pools. And it's hard to convince yourself after 2 years of losing if you actually have an edge. Whereas the AP doesn't, he can, if he goes through 2 months of losing, which might be as statistically improbable as a DFS player going through 2 years of losing, he can still just fall back on the math much more easily and convince himself that he should just keep going and believe in the math and believe in his edge. So I think that's one key difference. I think one nice thing about sports betting versus APing is you can make sports betting a lot more life friendly. I don't really know how to put it, a lot more 9 to 5. Whereas APing, you kind of have to be on the road a lot more. You kind of don't know when you're going to be working. You don't know when there's going to be a game on. You have to travel to Iowa and go and scout games and
Get
stay in.
up at 3 in the morning and play
Yeah,
graveyard.
yeah, or get up at 3 in the morning and find nothing to play, right?
Yeah.
Even worse. So yeah, it's easier to structure a more, let's say, mainstream life as a sports bettor than it is as an AP. Um, yeah, and I think also sports betting has a higher barrier to entry. Like the amount of hours that you have to put in before you can be theoretically profitable is more in sports betting than APing, where you've just, you hear a lot of stories, like, especially in the whole carding industry, of, oh, he was just my friend, so I invited him into a game, and, he learned strategy in 4 hours and off you go, that kind of thing.
Now,
One other thing on the difference between
yes,
APing and sports betting, though, is APing has the best stories, right? APing, you're on the road and you're interacting with human beings and doing kind of thinking on the fly, seat of the pants, saying stuff you shouldn't have said, carrying bags of cash around. Like there's just more. It's a better set of ingredients, a better atmosphere for good stories coming out of it. Since I've moved into sports betting, I just kind of check the results at the end of the week, and that's pretty much it.
In the notes you provided Richard and me before the show, you talked about a story that I don't know what's coming, but it sounds intriguing. At one point, you kidnapped a reader and took him to AC. Now, I'm assuming that's Atlantic City and not Anthony Curtis, but I'm not sure. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, I can tell the Atlantic City one, not the
Ah,
Anthony Curtis. The Anthony Curtis one's too secret and weird.
uh-huh.
Media show, but yeah, okay. So the kidnapping the AP. This started off. We were actually in another part of the East Coast. There's a group of about 7 of us. We went to go and play this game, and it didn't work. The play completely fell apart. The casino figured out what was going on very, very quickly. And David, the guy that I spoke about earlier, who I worked with during my time in Vegas, he and I didn't want to fly back to Vegas just yet. We kind of flown all the way out. We wanted to make more of a trip of it. So we decided we wanted to just go and check out a different part of the East Coast, AC, first before we flew back. And we tried to convince another member of the trip and his friend to come with us to AC. The main reason being is this guy was an elite reader, like an elite hole carder, and he could turn games that shouldn't really be games into games just because his eyesight was so good. But the problem was he wanted to go home. He wanted to go back to Vegas. He'd kind of had enough of the East Coast already, and thought, I need to go back to the sunshine and the more pleasant circumstances of Vegas. And so that only left Dave and I with a reasonable option, but to kidnap this elite reader and his friend and take them to AC. So how did we go about that, I guess, is this story. So they'd already booked their flight back to Vegas, so I just said, I'll book on the same flight as you guys, pretending that I booked a ticket as well, and come back to Vegas with you so that we could go to the airport together from the hotel the next day. And our plan, David and my plan, was for David to pretend to be an Uber, right? To pretend to be the Uber that was going to take us to the airport. But in fact, it was just him driving it. And we were just going to, instead of driving them to the airport, just drive all the way to AC.
So wait, they had never met David? So they didn't know what he looked like?
Yeah, no, they had. So the next question becomes, how are we going to disguise David as an Uber driver when we get in? Right? So he completely shaves all his hair and his facial hair, and I think goes out and buys a hoodie and the kind of shadiest looking sunglasses you've ever seen, and also goes and rents a car because we don't have a car at this point. And the next morning I say to the guys, don't worry, I've got the Uber, we'll go to the place together, just make sure you're downstairs at the hotel by this time. I can't remember what time it was. And I said to David beforehand, the one thing you've got to make sure not only is that they don't see you, but where you're going, right? Because if you show any hesitation when you're driving as an Uber driver, then that's going to arouse suspicion straight away. And also, we didn't think using GPS was a good idea because maybe it would say the destination that was put in there or whatever. So I was like, okay, David, just make sure you memorize the route and that you drive out of there with conviction, right? So all's going according to plan at this point. We all meet downstairs at the hotel. David texts me when he pulls up in the Uber. I say to the guys, all right, guys, Uber's ready, let's go. I obviously insist that I sit in the front seat and ask the guys to sit in the back. And I try and chat with them, converse with them to make sure that they're looking at me, not at David. So
do you lock the back doors like childproof locks so they can't open them up? Or
I don't know. I should say at this point, we are very good friends with these guys, and this, we only did it because we kind of thought it would be well received, as well as wanting them to come to AC with us, right? We if we if it was if we thought it was going to go down really badly, we don't think we would have done it. I don't think we would have done it. So anyway, hopefully, Bob, we didn't have to lock the back doors. I can't remember, but we get in the car, everything's going okay, but David makes the first possible wrong turn out of the hotel, and he starts initially to panic, but then in kind of the insanity of the whole situation, just bursts into laughter. And I'm like, we can't give up the game at this point because they're just going to insist we drive into the hotel. So I try and cover up the fact that the Uber driver's laughing with the guys in the back that, I think the driver's high, or like look at them confused, like what is going on, but try to just sort of play it down. And eventually David gathers himself again and I think gets us back on track. And we feel that the key moment is to get on the freeway to AC. As soon as we're on the freeway or the interstate, I can't remember what it was, and heading away from the airport, if we get that far, there will still be enough time possibly to get to the airport and make our flight if the guys really insist that they're not going to AC and they want to go home to Vegas. But it would be a mad rush, and hopefully at that point they'd see the funny side of things. So I try to calm things down, get the conversation back to something else apart from the fact that we seem to have a very shady looking high Uber driver. And eventually we get to the freeway and David takes off his hoodie, takes off his sunglasses and says, "Surprise, guys," and we're going to AC and we're kidnapping you and there's nothing you can do about it. And there's like 2 minutes of just all out laughter. I just remember the car was just uncontrollable laughter, all four of us for like 2 minutes. And eventually they say, "Okay, I guess we're going to AC then." And it was a great trip. We found great games. I think we only just about covered expenses. And David and I agreed to pay for their flight back to Vegas and any expenses they incurred when they were in AC. But more importantly, we had a great time and a good story to show for it.
And you're still friends?
Still friends, yeah. Still,
Good.
thankfully, they don't hate us after that. They liked it, ultimately, they saw the funny side.
Yeah.
All right.
You're right.
So there's
Sports bettors don't have those stories.
No, they don't. Nothing like that ever happens in sports betting.
All right. So we actually have a lot more to talk about with Will, but we're out of time, which means he has to come back, or we're going to kidnap him and take him to Atlantic City. So at the end of our shows, we have a recommended section. So, Richard, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, so my recommendation this week is somebody had asked in the past about Asian food in Las Vegas and particularly Thai food. So my brother's wife is from northern Thailand, and her favorite place is called Lao Market, and it's on the corner of Pecos and Desert Inn, and it's actually a market, but they have hot food in the back. And she and my brother say that that is as authentic Thai food as you can possibly get. It is exactly like the food you would get if you were up on the Thai-Laos border in Thailand. So anyway, that's my recommended. Go try the food at Lao Market.
Yeah, and Richard's brother is a foodie, a guy with knows a lot about food and stuff, and so I would take his recommendations on food as to how it compares quite seriously. My recommendation is a recent movie called Death on the Nile. Come out in this year. It's based on the Agatha Christie novel from back in the 30s. It's directed, produced, and starring by Kenneth Branagh, who plays the detective Hercule Poirot, along with Gal Gadot, Annette Bening, Arnie Hammer, and bunches of others. Branagh and Tom Bateman reprised their roles from Murder on Orient Express movie about 5 years ago. The rest of the cast is new. This is a love triangle mystery set on a cruise ship on the Nile in the 1930s. Scenery is gorgeous. A dance scene 10 minutes into it is like Dirty Dancing to 1930s blues music. I'm familiar with the novel, and several changes are made, as they always are between novels and movies, but I found myself enjoying it immeasurably. So, Will, do you have a recommended for our listeners?
Yeah, I do actually. I actually gave out this recommendation to a group of APs that I have a monthly call with yesterday. Shout out to those guys, by the way. And yeah, each month we have a call and we give what we call our best bets, which is our equivalent of recommended. And the one I gave out yesterday was an app called Other Ship. That's ship with a P and not another letter. And yeah, Bob, you asked me earlier about the differences between APing and sports betting.
Yes.
One of the commonalities between both professions is the importance of kind of emotional control and ability to stay calm and not panic in situations. And this Othership app is a breathwork, guided breathwork app where each morning and each evening you kind of do 5 or 10 minutes of guided breathwork. And I find it really beneficial for general relaxation, um, positivity, kind of reducing things like anxiety and increasing concentration. It's a little bit on the pricey side, I think, but they do have a free trial. And yeah, I definitely recommend people check it out.
Very good. Thank you, Will. This has been fun. Thank you, Richard. Go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody. Good day.